Here is a shocking revelation. For years, the Department of Justice maintained that no one other than Jeffrey Epstein should be prosecuted. But new evidence is upending everything. Why might these documents bring down heads and overturn the official narrative? Imagine thousands of secret documents, names, addresses, and details that have always been hidden. And all of this could come to light in the coming weeks. But there's one question that no one seems willing to answer. What if this is just the beginning? Why is the truth being so intensely concealed? You can't ignore what's happening now, as this story could change everything. What seems like a simple issue of justice is taking increasingly unexpected turns. Recently, the Department of Justice claimed that all of Epstein's crimes were isolated and that all leads had been exhausted. But the emergence of these new documents forces us to rethink the entire case. Is this story really over? Or is the truth hidden at the heart of this scandal even bigger than we imagined? The evidence continues to pour in, but the narrative we've been told seems to be cracking under pressure. Are we being made to believe that only a few people are responsible when there could be hundreds, even thousands? And what if we've only scratched the surface of this enormous web of lies? They claim one thing very precisely. Then a document appears and everything shakes. The Department of Justice stated clearly that there was no evidence implicating anyone other than Jeffrey Epstein. There are no hidden names, said the Deputy Attorney General, no network, no accomplices, no possible prosecutions. But now, look at what is coming out of the recently released files. A message sent directly to Jeffrey Epstein. Thanks for that fun night. Your youngest daughter was a bit cheeky. These aren't rumors. This isn't an interpretation. It's a written exchange preserved in the archives. And this document is just one example among thousands, maybe tens of thousands. So ask yourself this simple question. If Epstein was alone, who are these messages addressed to? Why are they talking about a night, a daughter, and most importantly, why is no name being prosecuted? Notice especially what's missing. No official explanation. And it's exactly here that the story begins to change shape. The situation doesn't stop there, because this document isn't an anomaly. It's part of a much larger sequence that the DOJ prefers to ignore. Let's rewind. In 2019, within the very office of the federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, internal exchanges between prosecutors and federal agents resurface. In these emails, they clearly state that they identified 10 co-conspirators involved in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. 10. Not one, not two, 10 people who were subjects of active discussions, legal strategies, and leads to explore. But here's the tipping point. This investigation abruptly stopped. No press conference, no indictment, no public explanation. The case was simply buried. And today, the same institutions claim that there was never anyone else to prosecute. Notice the contradiction. Either these prosecutors were lying in 2019 or someone is lying now. There is no third option. And when two official versions oppose each other directly, the real question becomes, who stands to gain from making certain leads disappear? From here, everything accelerates, because this is no longer about error or negligence. It's a pattern. When we look at how this kind of case has been handled in the past, one detail always comes up. At first, we talk about an individual. Then, quietly, the connections to other people are neutralized, diluted, or classified, and little by little, the abnormal becomes normal. Here, we are being asked to accept that among millions of documents, despite testimonies, written exchanges, and internal discussions about co-conspirators, there was only one culprit, now deceased. This kind of narrative is not new. What's new is the speed at which it is being imposed, without debate, without transparency. Look at what's happening now. The authorities claim to have disclosed everything while admitting that millions of documents remain unpublished, and yet no clear justification, no timeline, no independent oversight. This is where normalization becomes dangerous, when an institution can say, move along, nothing to see here, while keeping the evidence. And it's exactly at this point that the story shifts into something far more serious, because the following evidence is even harder to ignore. And it definitively changes the way this case must be understood. On one side, the official narrative repeats that no other responsible party can be identified. On the other, the documents reveal explicit exchanges, cross-references, and above all, coordinated activity around Epstein. Not a lone man, a center. Here's the key contradiction. The Department of Justice claims it wants to protect the victims. But when nearly 3 million documents were recently released, thousands of references containing personal victim information were left exposed. Names, contact details, identities. There was only one mission: to protect them. And that mission failed gravely. Now look at what this means. If these documents were published without adequate control, either the incompetence is extreme or the rush was intentional. And in both cases, this opens up a major consequence. The victims now have an undeniable legal right to challenge the entire process. Here's the line that changes everything. By rushing to close the case, the system may have created the very condition that will force it to reopen everything. And once this door is open, there's no turning back. And this is when everything turns into an uncontrollable mini-crisis. First, the victims discover that their personal information has been exposed publicly, not by an outside leak, by the state itself. Then lawyers begin to talk about something very specific: the possibility of filing with a judge to remove the Department of Justice's control over the documents entirely. Then comes the third most explosive element. The Epstein Records Transparency Act forces the DOJ to justify every unpublished document, every redacted line, every omission. And today, this requirement is not being met. All of this is happening at once, too quickly, too badly, and under pressure. This is no longer a controlled affair. It's a buildup of mistakes that leaves no room to maneuver. The more the DOJ tries to hold the reins, the more it creates the conditions to lose them. Now, ask yourself the only question that really matters: what happens if this process continues in exactly this direction? Because at this point, no one seems able to press pause. Now, bring all this back to you. Because this case isn't abstract. It's not just for the courts or Washington's back rooms. If an institution can expose victims by mistake or in haste, then refuse to answer clearly, it creates a precedent. Today, it's women tied to the Epstein case. Tomorrow, it could be anyone caught in a poorly managed procedure. Imagine discovering that your identity, your address, your traumatic past have been made public without warning, not by a hacker, not by a tabloid, but by those meant to protect you. This is exactly what some victims describe today: fear, anxiety, a total sense of abandonment. And this point is crucial. There is no more political debate here. There are no sides. There are only real, human, irreversible consequences. When trust disappears, the system stops working for everyone. If this feeling sounds familiar to you, say so in the comments, because this collective unease never appears by accident, and it always signals what comes next. To understand how we got here, we need to look at the mechanism, not just the scandal. What allows a situation like this to exist is not a Hollywood conspiracy. It's a system of incentives. The Department of Justice controls the pace, volume, and form of information. The more it retains control, the more it avoids immediate risk. But this control comes at a cost. Opacity becomes a default strategy. Here's the disturbing point. In this kind of system, the truth is not blocked because it's unknown, but because it's costly. Costly politically, costly institutionally, costly to credibility. So time is bought. Revelations are fragmented. We talk about protection while the real mechanism is risk management. And notice this: the more public pressure grows, the greater the temptation to turn transparency into spectacle rather than genuine access to facts. Publishing millions of documents without control is not clarity. It's noise. This is where this case becomes smarter than the usual media cycle. True power isn't visible in what's said, but in what can be delayed without immediate consequence, until the moment when it's no longer possible. At this point, two trajectories are starting to emerge, and neither is comfortable. First possibility: the Department of Justice sticks to its position. It resists. It slows down. It continues to claim that the essential has already been revealed. But every day that passes increases the risk. Victims are organizing. Legal recourse is becoming clearer. And the idea of a judge imposing a special master, an independent third party to review all documents, becomes less and less theoretical. Second possibility: the pressure becomes too great. The past mistakes, notably the massive exposure of sensitive information, force judicial intervention. And from there, control completely slips from the DOJ. All documents not destroyed, not wrongly classified, fall under the court's authority. Every redaction must be justified. Every omission explained publicly. What makes this phase unstable is that no one really decides when we switch from one to the other. The momentum is already set. The next decisions won't be announced with fanfare. They'll happen in courtrooms on technical motions, almost invisibly. But one thing is clear. The next step is already forming. And once it's crossed, it will irreversibly redefine what transparency means in this case. One idea must remain in mind. This case is not just about documents, prosecutors, or procedures. It's a demonstration of what happens when a system thinks it can manage the truth instead of delivering it. Today, the Epstein case is no longer a scandal of the past. It's a real-time test, a test of accountability, a test of institutional courage, and above all, a test of collective memory. If all of this disappears without consequences, then the message is clear. Some crimes can be diluted to the point of forgetting, but if the light continues to move forward, slowly, legally, methodically, then this case will become something else, not an end, a precedent. And the final question is simple. When the truth becomes impossible to contain, who will still be standing to explain it? If you want to follow this exact moment, the one where the balance shifts, subscribe. Because this story has not reached its most important point. Not yet.